And then, said the friend who had whispered, there was Bullard, the teetotum. I call him the teetotum because, in fact, he was seized with the droll, but not altogether irrational, crotchet, that he had been converted into a teetotum. You would have roared with laughter to see him spin. He would turn round upon one heel by the hour, in this matter so. Here the friend whom he had just interrupted with by whisper performed in exactly a similar office for himself. But then, cried an old lady at the top of her voice, your Monsieur Bullard was a madman, and a very silly madman at best, for who, allow me to ask you, ever heard of a human teetotum? The thing is absurd. Madame Joyeuse was a more sensible person, as you know. She had a crotchet, but it was instinct with common sense and gave pleasure to all who had the honor of her acquaintance. She found upon mature deliberation that by some accident she had been turned into a chicken cock, but as such she behaved with propriety. She flapped her wings with prodigious effect, so, and as for her crow, it was delicious. Cock-a-doodle-doo, 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 cock-a-doodle-dee-doo, do, 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 do. Madame Joyeuse, I will thank you to behave yourself, here interrupted our host very angrily. You can either conduct yourself as a lady as should do, or you can quit the table forthwith. Take your choice. The lady, whom I was much astonished to hear addressed as Madame Joyeuse, after the description of Madame Joyeuse she had just given, blushed up to the eyebrows and seemed exceedingly abashed as the reproof. She hung down her head and said not a syllable in reply, but another and younger lady resumed the theme. It was my beautiful girl of the little parlor. Oh, Madame Joyeuse was a fool, she exclaimed, but there was really no much sound sense after all in the opinion of Eugène Salsafetti. She was a beautiful and painfully modest young lady, who thought the ordinary mode of belle indecent, and was to dress herself as always by getting outside instead of inside her clothes. It is a thing very easily done. After all, you have to only do so, and then so, and then so, and then. Mon Dieu, Mademoiselle Salsafette, here cried a dozen voices at once. What are you on about? Forbear, that is sufficient. We see very plainly how it is done. Hold. And several persons were already leaping upon us from the seats to withhold Mademoiselle Salsafette from putting herself upon a par with the Medicean Venus. When the point was very effectually and suddenly accomplished by a series of loud screams or yells from some portion of the main body of the chateau. My nerves were very much affected indeed by these yells. But the rest of the company I really pitied. I never saw any set of reasonable people so thoroughly frightened in my life. They all grew as pale as so many corpses, and shrinking within their seats sat quivering, gibbering with terror, and listening for a repetition of the sound. It came again, louder and seemingly nearer, and then a third time very loud, and then a fourth time with a vigor evidently diminished. At this apparent dying away of the noise, the spirits of the company were immediately regained, and it all was life and anecdote as before. I now ventured to inquire the cause of the disturbance. A mere bagatelle, said Monsieur Maillard. We are used to such these things, and really care very little about them. The lunatics every now and then get up a howl in concert, one stirring another, as is sometimes the case with a bevy of dogs at night. simultaneous effort at breaking loose when, of course, some little danger is to be apprehended. And how many have you in charge? At present, we have not more than 10 altogether. Principally females, I presume? Oh no, every one of them men. And stout fellows, too, I can tell you. Indeed, I've always understood that the majority of lunatics were of the gentler sex. It is generally so, but not always. Some time ago, there were about 27 patients here, and of that number, no less than 18 were women. But lately, matters have changed very much, as you see. Yes, have changed very much, as you see, here interrupted the gentleman who broke the shins of Mademoiselle Laplace. Yes, have changed very much, as you see, chimed the whole company at once. Hold your tongues, every one of you, said my host in a great rage. Whereupon the whole company maintained a dead silence for nearly a minute. As for one lady, she observed Monsieur Maillard to the letter, and thrusting out her tongue, which was an excessively long one, held it very resignedly with both hands until the end of the entertainment. And this gentlewoman, said I to Monsieur Maillard, bending over and addressing him in a whisper, this good lady who has just spoken, and who gives us the cock-a-doodle-dee-doo, she, I presume, is harmless? Quite harmless, eh? Harmless? Ejaculated he in unfeigned surprise. Why? Why? What can you mean? Only, slightly touched? Said I, touching my head. I take for granted that she is not dangerously affected, eh? Mon Dieu, what is it you imagine? This lady, my particular old friend, Madame Joyeuse, is as absolutely sane as myself. She has her little eccentricities, to be sure, but then, as all old women, all very old women, are more or less eccentric. To be sure, said I, to be sure. And then the rest of these ladies and gentlemen are my friends and keepers, interrupted Monsieur Maillard, drawing himself up with hauteur. My very good friends and assistants. What, all of them? I asked. The women and all? Assuredly, he said, we cannot do all without the women. They are the best lunatic nurses in the world. They have a way of their own, Their bright eyes have their marvelous effect. Something like the fascination of a snake, To be sure, said I, to be sure, they behave a little odd, eh? They are a little queer, eh? Don't you think so? Odd, queer? Why, do you really think so? We are not very prudish to be sure, here in the South. Do pretty much as we please. Enjoy life and all that sort of thing, To be sure, said I, to be sure. And then perhaps this Claus de Lugo is a little heady, a little strong, you understand, eh? To be sure, said I, to be sure. By the by, monsieur, I did understand you to say that the system you have adopted, in the place of the celebrated soothing system, was one of very rigorous severity. By no means. Our confinement is necessarily close, but the treatment, the medical treatment, I mean, is rather agreeable to the patients than otherwise. And the new system is one of your own invention? Not altogether. Some portions of it are referable to Professor Tarr, of whom you have necessarily heard. And again, there are modifications in my plan, which I am happy to acknowledge as belonging of right to the celebrated Fether, with whom, I mistake not, you have the honor of an intimate acquaintance. I am quite ashamed to confess, I replied, that I have never even heard of the names of either of these gentlemen before. Good heavens, ejaculated my host, drawing back his chair abruptly and uplifting his hands. I surely do not hear you aright. You did not intend to say, that you have never heard of either of the learned Dr. Tarr or of the celebrated Professor Fether? I am forced to acknowledge my ignorance, I replied, but the truth should be held inviolate above all things. Nevertheless, I feel humbled to the dust not to be acquainted with the new works of these, no doubt, extraordinary men. I will seek out their writings forthwith and peruse them with deliberate care. Monsieur Maillard, you have really, I must confess it, you really made me ashamed of myself. And this was the fact. Say no more, my good young friend, he said kindly, pressing my hand. Join me now in a glass of Sauternes. We drank. The company followed one example without stint. We chatted, we jest, they laughed, they perpetrated 1,000 absurdities. The fiddle shrieked, the drum roadidoed, the trombones bellowed like so many brazen bulls of Phalaris. And the whole scene, growing gradually worse and worse, as the wines gained the ascendancy and became at length a sort of pandemonium in petto. In the meantime, Monsieur Maillard and myself were with some bottles of Sauternes and Ducos between us. Continued our conversation at the top of the voice. A word spoken in an ordinary key stood no more chance of being heard than the fish of its voice in the bottom of Niagara Falls. And, sir, said I, screaming in his ear, you mentioned something before dinner about the danger incurred in the old system of soothing. How is that? Yes, he replied, there was occasionally very great danger indeed. There is no accounting for the caprices of madmen, and in my opinion, as well as in that of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether, it is never safe to permit them to run at large unattended. A lunatic may be soothed, as it is called, for a time, but in the end he is very apt to become obstreperous. His cunning, too, is proverbial and great. If he has a project in view, he conceals his design with marvelous wisdom, and the dexterity with which he counterfeits sanity presents to the metaphysician one of the most singular problems in the study of the mind. When a madman appears thoroughly insane, indeed, it is high time to put him in a straitjacket. But the danger, my dear sir, of which you are speaking, in your own experience, during the control of this house, have you had practical reason to think liberty hazardous in the case of the lunatic? Here, in my own experience, why, I may say yes. For example, no very long ago, a singular circumstance occurred in this very house. The soothing system, you know, was then in operation, and the patients were at large. They behaved remarkably well, especially so. Any one of sense might have known that some devilish scheme was brewing from that particular fact, and the fellows behaved so remarkably well. And sure enough, one fine morning the keepers found themselves pinioned hand and foot and thrown into the cells, where they that were attended as if they were the lunatics, by the lunatics themselves who had usurped the offices of the keepers. You don't tell me so. I never heard anything so absurd in my life. In fact, it all came to pass by means of a stupid fellow, a lunatic, who by some means has taken it into his head that he invented a better system of government than any ever heard of before. Of lunatic government, I mean. He wished to give his invention a trial, I suppose, and so he persuaded the rest of the patients to join him in a conspiracy for the throw of the reigning powers. And he really succeeded? No doubt of it. The keepers were soon made to exchange places. Not that exactly either, for the madman had been set free. But the keepers were shut up in cells forthwith and treated, I am so sorry to say, in a very cavalier manner. But I presume a counter-revolution was soon effected. This condition of things could not have long existed. The country people in their neighborhood, visitors coming to see the establishment, would have given the alarm. There you are out. The head rebel was too cunning for that. He admitted no visitors at all, except with one exception. One day, of a very stupid-looking young gentleman, of whom he had no reason to be afraid. He let him in to see the place, just by way of variety, to have a little fun with him. As soon as he had gammoned him sufficiently, he let him out and sent him about his business. And how long, then, did the madman reign? Oh, a very long time indeed. A month, certainly. How much longer I can't precisely say. In the meantime, the lunatics had a jolly season of it, that you may swear. They doffed off their shabby clothes, and made free with the family wardrobe and jewels. The cellars in the chateau were well stocked with wine, and these madmen are just the devils that know how to drink it. They lived well, I can tell you. And the treatment, what was the particular species of treatment which the leader of the rebels put in operation? Why, as for that, a madman is not necessarily a fool, as I've already observed, and it is my honest opinion that his treatment was much better treatment than that which it superseded. It was a very capital system indeed. It's simple, neat, no trouble at all. In fact, it was delicious. It was... Here my host's observations were cut short by another series of yells, of the same character of those of which had previously disconcerted us. This time, however, they seemed to proceed from persons rapidly approaching. Gracious heavens, I ejaculated. The lunatics have most undoubtedly broken loose. I very much fear it is so, replied Monsieur Mallard. Maylord, now becoming excessively pale. He had scarcely finished the sentence before loud shouts and imprecations were heard beneath the windows, and immediately after it became evident that some persons outside were endeavoring to gain entrance into the room. The door was beaten with what appeared to be a sledgehammer, and the shutters were wrenched and shaken with prodigious violence. A scene of the most terrible confusion ensued. Monsieur Maillard, to my excessive astonishment, threw himself under the sideboard. I expected more resolution at his hands. The members of the orchestra, who for the last 15 minutes had been seemingly too much intoxicated to do duty, now sprang all at once to their feet into their instruments, and scrambling up their table once to their feet into their instruments. And scrambling up upon their table broke out with one accord into Yankee Doodle, which they performed, if not exactly in tune, at least with an energy superhuman, during the whole of the uproar. Meantime, upon the main dining table, among the bottles and glasses, leaped the gentleman who, with such difficulty, had been restrained from leaping there before. As soon as he had fairly settled himself, he commenced an oration which no doubt was a very capital one, if it could only have been heard. At the same time, the man with the teetotum predilection set himself to spinning around the apartment with immense energy and with arms outstretched at right angles with his body, so that he had all the air of a teetotum. In fact, he knocked everyone down who happened to get in his way. And now, hearing an incredible popping and fizzing of champagne, I discovered at length that it proceeded from the person who performed the bottle of that delicate drink during dinner. And then again, the frogman croaked away as if salvation of his soul depended upon every note that he had uttered. And in the midst of all this, the continuing braying of a donkey arose over all. As for my old friend, Madame Joyeuse, I could have wept for the poor lady. She appeared so terribly perplexed. All she did, however, was to stand up in a corner by the fireplace and sing out incessantly at the top of her voice, "Cock-a-doodle-dee-doo." And now came the climax, the catastrophe of the drama. As no resistance, beyond whooping and yelling and cock-a-doodling, was offered to the encroachment of the party, without the 10 windows were very speedily and almost simultaneously broken in. But I shall never forget the emotions of wonder and horror with which I gazed when leaping through these windows and down among us Pele melee, fighting, stamping, scratching, and howling, there rushed a perfect army of what I took to be chimpanzees, orangutans, or big black baboons of the Cape of Good Hope. I received a terrible beating, after which I rolled onto a sofa and lay still. After lying there for some 50 minutes, however, during which time I listened with all my ears to what was going on, I came to some satisfactory denouement of this tragedy. Monsieur Maillard, it appeared, in giving me the account of the lunatic who had excited his fellows to rebellion, had been merely relating his own exploits. This gentleman had indeed, some 2 or 3 years before, been the superintendent of the establishment, but grew crazy himself, and so became a patient. This fact was unknown by the traveling companion who introduced me. The keepers, 10 in all number, having been suddenly overpowered, were well tarred, and then carefully feathered, and then shut up in underground cells. They had been so imprisoned for more than a month, during which period Monsieur Maillard had generously allowed them not only the tar and feathers, which constituted his quote-unquote system, but some bread and abundance of water. The latter was pumped on them daily. At length, one escaping through a sewer gave freedom to all the rest. The quote-unquote soothing system, with important modifications, has been resumed at the chateau. Yet I cannot help agreeing with Monsieur Maillard that his own quote-unquote treatment was a very capital one of its kind. As he justly observed, it was, quote, simple, neat, and gave no trouble at all, not the least, unquote. I have only to add that although I have searched every library in Europe for the works of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether, I have up to the present day utterly failed in my endeavors to procure a copy.